Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being forced to listen to me today. I chose to do my topic on the opioid crisis. Any of you, by just a show of hands, do you guys know what an opioid is? Just like a quick guess, no? Okay, so like half of you, I would say. And for the other people that don't know, that might be a good thing based on what you hear about it. We'll get into a little bit of what an opioid is. So an opioid is basically a painkiller medication derived from opium, which comes from opium poppies. You've probably heard a few different painkiller medications on movies or shows or hospital visits. These are medications like oxycodone, codeine, morphine, Percocet. Heroin is also considered an opioid. These are just a few examples of what an opioid is. And they're used for pretty good things on some occasions. They're used to treat pain after very difficult surgeries. They're used to treat very chronic conditions like fibromyalgia. They can treat nerve conditions that people have to treat their pain, along with other medications to kind of go along with that. But there's also the most important part of an opioid to kind of understand is the negative side effects. So some of these negative side effects they go from liver damage to sedation to nausea, vomiting, to kind of a more on the worst scale of basically respiratory failure is another big negative side effect. What happens is in higher doses of these opioids, your brain basically is affected, a specific part of your brain is affected, the part that controls your respiratory rate and everything. So in higher doses, when you hear about all these overdose deaths, it's basically because they either stopped breathing and vomited and kind of choked on their own vomit, or switched that around, or they just stopped breathing altogether, their heart failed, one of those things. So it's very important to understand the negative side effects. And just a couple examples of the negative side effects that can cause. Basically, there's some statistics I'll kind of read to you. So in the U.S. alone, last year, they said that 91 people per day died based on an opioid-related overdose, which they said was about 33,000 per year. And in Canada, it was around 3,000. So if you factor in the population and everything like that, it's pretty dang close. They also, another statistic that was very interesting was 1 in 5 people usually have access to opioids, a prescribed opioid that they have been given, or someone that they know basically has an opioid. And that's it's a pretty small number, 1 in 5. That means that at least a couple of us in here have related to opioids or have been involved with it in our past or future. So now that we've talked a little bit about the opioids and kind of what they do, I want to talk about the crisis part, about what they call the opioid crisis. So basically, when a province, a country, a city, whatever, when they kind of declare an opioid crisis, what that means is they're basically stating that, hey, this is basically stating a very important fact that we need fast, efficient resources. It kind of is a general statement so that everyone understands how serious it is. It's basically a very important fact so that they can gain these resources to inform, to involve, and to educate doctors, med students, patients, just normal citizens. It's super important when they kind of declare this so that everyone kind of understands kind of where this whole opioid crisis stands. And that's part of the main goal when they, if there was a main goal banner up below an opioid crisis, it would basically say that all politicians, leaders, and people are kind of on the same page so that they understand how serious this is. So now I'm going to basically kind of use an example of okay, yeah, this is a crisis, okay, but how does someone get to that point, okay? So I'll use a quick example. So I have a friend, she was driving with her husband and 2 small kids last year. They were driving on the icy roads, and they got head-on collided with a semi-truck. None of them died, but 2 of their kids broke both their legs. Both the husband and wife had fractured skulls. At least every single one of them broke more than 2 bones. They all had at least some sort of internal bleeding. So if you kind of factor all those things together, that's a ton of pain to deal with. And the doctor approached my friend and said, hey, look, we have this medication called fentanyl that you can take to control your pain. And my friend, only reading like the headlines of all these news articles that she had saw, basically when you see fentanyl in the news, it's all about overdoses and deaths. It's pretty scary stuff. So she kind of freaked out and was like, hey, no, this is not, I don't want this fentanyl thing, I don't want anything to do with it, blah, blah, blah. But because this doctor was well aware of the opioid crisis, he was informed, he knew kind of the risk, he knew how to approach patients, and he was able to educate her on a very real way. She was able to get on the medication, she was able to control her pain, and now her whole family, they're basically doing pretty well. Still recovering, but that's just like a little example of what can happen if someone's informed. So just take a second and think about the fact that if you walked into a doctor who just loves writing prescriptions and did not inform you of what you were taking, then that's a pretty scary thing. Because, in the future or in the past, we are all going to be involved. I think they said, a stat that I was reading, that we at least have at least 3 invasive surgeries per lifetime, which means at least one point in our life we're going to need some pain medication or some sort of medical treatment, whether that's us, a loved one, or anything else. So I wanted to kind of explain what this means so that when you have a friend, loved one, or yourself in this situation, you will take the time to inform yourself, become educated, and be well aware of the risks that this can cause. Because if you do that, you can save lives. Because the opioid crisis has taken so many lives, I think it's really important that we understand the saving part and the informing part. So thanks for listening.